Okay, here we go with another review here. It's going to be a review of the breakup of the continents with a little bit of additional information. Be a little additional evidence, I guess you might say. So, without further too much problems here, how we go? Let's go ahead and add this to the stage here. And we'll go here. This is the wrong part. Okay. So this is kind of in the outline form here, so it should be easy to follow, easy to understand. Okay. It was a little bit lengthy, so I had to cut it down. So should be easier to follow here. Okay, so we have a catastrophic plate tectonics. Now this is a catastrophic event similar to the global flood, only it was 100 years after the global flood. The Bible mentions it in passing, said in the days of Peleg the earth was divided. And if you read it literally, it means that the continents broke apart. So we do have some evidence of that. So immediately post-flood, between year 0 and year 100 after the flood, of course, the sediments have to be deposited first, and then they break up. It's very, very important. Noah's family and animals leave the ark on a single softened supercontinent post-flood Pangaea-like landmass. Now, it's true, it was soft and it had to be soft for the folds to bend, the sediment layers to fold and bend. So it was still soft enough for the sediment layers to fold and bend as the continents were breaking apart, and there was a lot of upheaval as well, a lot of pressure on the continents from all sides, or both sides, you might say, which caused at least in the Americas, just both sides were putting pressure on it, and so there was an uplift of like the Appalachian Mountains, Brazilian Highlands, and the Rocky Mountains, and the Andes. So it would have to be soft still, even though I was thinking maybe it was drying out or started to dry out, or maybe the heated parts, because there was heat in the global flood that made the limestone into marble with fossils in them. And of course, that could have been during this catastrophic breakup as well. But the animals rapidly migrate and diversify, which is kind of what God wanted people to do, to isolate and to diversify and to They had become different people groups. So the animals did that. They diversify. Humans multiply but refuse to disperse, clustering in Shinar and beginning the Tower of Babel. So they started building the Tower of Babel. Okay, it was about 100 years after the global flood. There was a trigger. You might say it's a possible trigger, but it's if it occurred, it would be a trigger. It was an asteroid impact triggers the division. There's a large asteroid, about 30-kilometer, impacts the Indian Ocean near the Burckle Crater region about 5,000 years ago by the chevron-dune and marine-sediment evidence. Okay, the glancing blow exploits the weakened water-soaked mantle and fractures the supercontinent along pre-existing seams. Biblical timing: in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. Rapid continental separation associated catastrophes. It was about a 200-year process. Northward mass rebalancing, pre-flood, flood landmass was heavily skewed toward the South Pole. In other words, there had to be there was sort of a rebalancing of the mass of the continents, which before the breakup, they were like on one side of the South Pole. So most of the landmass was on one side of the South Pole for whatever reason. So when they broke up, along with the spinning Earth, centrifugal force caused the continents to move north. And of course, with the force of the strike as well, set it in motion. So there was equilibrium that had to be reached with the movement of the continents. As they were breaking apart, or as they were moving north, they separated from each other, of course. And the motion also dragged Antarctica over top of the South Pole. Okay, Permian glacier deposits on all southern continents prove this. So there's glacial striations on all the southern continents, including Australia, India, which is now north of the equator, South Africa, or Africa and South America. They all have great glacial striations showing that they were once at the South Pole or above the South Pole or near the South Pole, including India. India moved more than the other ones because that's where the impact was. The Earth's rotation was unstable, so it would probably wobbling. The Earth was probably wobbling to begin with. Then with the strike, the impact force flung continents northward, achieving modern hemispheric equilibrium. 68% land in Northern Hemisphere today, while Antarctica anchored the new South Pole. So the South Pole was over South Africa, according to the glacial striations. But after the strike, after the breakup, Antarctica was dragged down over top of the South Pole, which would explain why Antarctica was ice-free for a period of time. Okay, we have runaway subduction and mountain building. India races north. Himalayas, Nazca subducts. Andes, Pacific Plate buckles violently. So there's a lot of pressure all the way around. The Mariana Trench buckled under. It forms in months or years. Rapid orogeny produces today's major ranges. That's called mountain building, with folded strata showing no erosion between layers. Of course, that was the sediments that were deposited by the global flood that have no erosion between the layers. Deep ocean sediment removal. So in other words, after the global flood, obviously there would have been lots of sediment in the oceans. Okay, the reason why they're not there anymore is because of the breakup of the continents, which caused the sediments to move, and it caused a lot of subduction of the sediment layers that were there right after the global flood. So thick flood deposited sediments originally covered both land and proto-ocean floors. During rapid spreading and subduction, meters year instead of centimeters per year, nearly all pre-division ocean crust in the sediment blanket was subducted and recycled into the mantle. This explains why ocean basins have only a thin, young sediments today, about 500 to 1,000 feet, while continents preserve miles thick fossil-bearing strata. Grand Canyon Formation, the Colorado Plateau uplifts 2 miles, isostatic rebound, and mantle upwelling. Receding waters and impact-tsunamis carve the canyon in weeks to months. Eroded sediment is carried westward and subducted in Pacific trenches with no massive delta required. It's the reason there's no massive delta where the Grand Canyon flows into the Pacific Ocean. Polar shift and megafauna flash freeze. Okay, rotational wobble and northward continental surge displaces ocean pole, which is a good question. It seems that there were already seasons before the breakup of the continent, so the Earth was already tilted on its axis after the global flood because there were seasons. So, but there's a wobble, there's a rotational wobble. Northward continental surge displaces oceans poleward. So as the continents were moving north, the sea level in the Arctic would have risen, causing flash floods, burying mammoths, bison, etc. Mid-meal buttercups in mouths and saltwater diatoms in their lungs. This is the evidence that Grok volunteered. So you have saltwater diatoms in the lungs. Okay, human and biological scattering. Okay, continents separate, isolate animals populations, hyper-diversify. So you get the lion kind, the tiger, the leopard, the jaguar. Each one isolated into their niches, their populations, and remained isolated enough for them to diversify. And of course, the leopard and the jaguar became separated with the breakup of the continent. So you have the language confusion at Babel, accelerated by impact, chaos, and isolation. So when the impact occurred, it was a catastrophic event, and more than likely, people isolated into family groups at that time. So whenever anything catastrophic happens, first place you're going to go is to your family. You're going to isolate into family groups, and that's, of course, when they began speaking their own languages because of their isolation. So they they quit building the Tower of Babel, of course, and began speaking their own dialect. So forces human dispersal along new continental paths. All ancient civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, Indus, Shang China, Mesoamerica, appear simultaneously. So all these civilizations existed simultaneously. It's not that one produced the other. They all, of course, have a common ancestor. They're all descended from the 16 grandsons of Noah. About 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, with shared flood legends. Lasting evidence today, we got a young ocean crust, 200 million years by radiometric dating, but truly 4,500 years old by known historical records. Thin ocean sediments versus thick continental strata. That's one thing that I've always thought about. It's like, why are the ocean sediments so thin compared to the land sediment layers? Why aren't there sediment layers in the ocean the same as there are sediment layers on land? Well, this breakup of the continents and the subduction of the sediment layers is what explains it. You have the Mariana Trench and other deep trenches as subduction scars. Overthrust mountains with flat contacts and no erosion gaps. Yeah, we do have, there are some overthrust mountains, as a matter of fact, with flat contacts and no erosion gaps. That's a big mystery in geology. When you have huge sections, miles long or whatever, just thrust over top of other sediment layers. In other words, you have sometimes even the younger layers on top and the older layers on top and the younger layers underneath. So that's a huge question in geology, how that happened. So the breakup of the continents could easily explain that happening. Okay, Northern Hemisphere land dominance after Southern. Heavy pre-division configuration. Okay, Northern Hemisphere land after Southern heavy pre-division configuration. Well, Don't know what it's exactly trying to say there, but there's a lot of land in the Northern Hemisphere. Well, because of the direction of how the continents were pushed to the north. Of course, as they pushed to the north, they separated. But Asia pretty much stayed intact, but it was pushed up in the Northern Hemisphere. I guess that's what it's trying to say. So that's the reason why there's a lot of land mass in the Northern Hemisphere. So we got chevron mega-tsunami dunes in the Burckle Crater area, flash frozen megafauna graves, which is the reason why animals were quick frozen and or buried by tsunamis. Okay, and this single brief catastrophic episode triggered 100 years after the global flood and completed within a few centuries explains the major features of modern geology far better than the billions of years of slow process, and it fits precisely with the biblical timeline, historical timeline, mind you, of Noah to Peleg to Abraham. So this says it happened in a few centuries. It probably happened in the first number of years, 5 or 10 years or 20 years. Of course, it probably continued because of the fact that the flash frozen, they were quickly shoved up. The continents were quickly shoved up into the Arctic before the animals could migrate. They were frozen solid before they could even move from where they were. And there's a big question as to how the animals could have been quick frozen in the manner that they were. And the only way that I can see of them to be quick frozen like that is if they were just instantly covered with ice. And of course, the temperature would just drop down below zero. So that's a good explanation of what happened. And we have all the evidence to back it up. We have the animals that are separated from each other between North and South America and the rest of the world. We have the fossils that line up between the continents. We have the sediment layers that line up between the continents. There was even a dinosaur footprint going from Africa to South America. And it clearly did not cross the ocean to get there. So as the sediments were being deposited, the dinosaur was walking from Africa to South America. And then the sediment layers were continued to be deposited, and then they broke apart. So the dinosaur didn't cross the Atlantic Ocean to continue on walking in South America from Africa. I mean, these are facts. These are what the facts are. The glacial striations are facts. The thin sediment layers in the deep oceans are a fact. The frozen megafauna, huge numbers of animals of all kinds, quick frozen in the Arctic areas, the Arctic regions. It's a fact. And the only thing that can explain it is the breakup of the continents 100 years after the global flood in the days of Peleg, 4,300 years ago, more or less, depending on how you count the years. So we have all this evidence here, and if you ask, if evidence demands a verdict, then you have to come to a conclusion. So it's a lot of evidence. It actually started out with noticing. I started to notice that the same animals like skunks and greater grison and leopards or jaguars are in South America as the rest of the world. They just called different. They had called different names, but they're actually the same animals. They even go so far as to call South American possums, they call them opossums, just to make them different, but they're actually the same animal. Obviously the same animal. Jaguars are obviously the same animal as a leopard. Greater grison is obviously the same animal as the honey badger. Otters are obviously the same animal as otters everywhere else in the world. You got North American otters, South American otters, giant otters, all kinds of otters. And we got tapirs. You got South American tapirs and you got Asian tapirs. They were separated. And how did all those animals get there? Did they surf on a raft or make a raft or get there? It's hard to believe that all those animals were on a raft and floated there at the same time on the same raft, or even different rafts. That would be kind of hard to believe. But that's the explanation. But it still doesn't explain everything. It's just an ad hoc explanation of how the animals got to South America and North America. Of course, some of them obviously walked on ice, like the polar bears and the seals and stuff. But it's what caused the mountains to be pushed up was in the breakup of the continents. Because after the global flood, the water ran off, but the mountains weren't pushed up yet, at least not to the extent they are today. The reason why the mountains are so high today is because of the extreme pressure placed on the continents as they broke apart and moved north. And as the Atlantic ridge or the magma was coming out and pressing against the continents, pushing them away, they're getting pressure there on both sides. And I always wondered where the Appalachians are, why the Rockies, where the Rockies are. And of course, there's always, why the Himalayas are where India was pushed into Asia. Why such a catastrophic thing happened. Where did these forces come from? It takes a lot of force to push up the Himalayas and the Rockies and the Andes and all the other mountain ranges. But it was because of the extreme pressures placed on them from the breakup of the continents and the subduction. Once the Earth was broken apart, you have all these currents, magma currents coming up, and it just totally replaced all the ocean floors over everywhere around the world, in the Pacific, Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, everywhere. And Asia went north and basically broke apart from Australia as it was moving north as well. But the animals had already reached there. That's the thing. The animals had already reached Australia by the time the continents broke apart, because they had 100 years to get there. And it seems like the animals tended to return to where they came from, the direction of where they came from. They tended to go back in many cases, or some cases, and any stragglers might not have made it, might not have survived. Just like the Y chromosomes in the Levant area had trouble surviving, or Anatolia. That area of Anatolia is a very, very difficult place back in the day. So there's no more Arameans, no more Lydians, no more Canaanites. There's even no more Assyrians to speak of in the area, even though they're nearby. They're up in the mountains. It seemed like people escaped to the mountains whenever there was trouble. But even the Assyrians and the descendants of Nimrod, the Cushite descendants of Nimrod, are scarce in the area of Anatolia, and the Levant area, and Assyria, even Assyria. So it's a difficult place if you're in the middle of everything, especially for the Y chromosome. Not so much for the mitochondrial lineages, but for the Y chromosome is a very difficult place. So that's what we got, everything all explained here. And it makes a lot more sense than not having the breakup of the continents, for sure. Anyway, let's go see if there's anything going on. Not a whole lot going on here, I guess. So I guess that's about it. Let me see if I can remove this. We'll go back here. Okay. That was my presentation on the breakup of the continents, and the new addition was how the ocean floors have such a thin sediment layer covering the deep ocean floors, which is very, very important, very significant. So everybody take care, God bless, and hope to see you again soon.